Well, only 2 days after the terrible tragedy on the Potomac, we have another fatal accident, but this time it's involving a fixed-wing air ambulance. And the details are obviously quite slim at this point, but we'll see what we can learn here. So stick around and I'll be right back. Now, the data is showing that this accident occurred just after 6 p.m. on Friday, January 31st, just southwest of Northeast Philadelphia Airport, where we had a Learjet 55, which had just taken off from runway 24 and was destined for Tijuana, Mexico, but by way of Springfield, Branson, Missouri first. Now on board were two pilots, a young girl, the girl's mother, a physician, and a paramedic for a total of 6 people, and there were no survivors. And there possibly, I haven't got confirmed reports yet, been serious injuries or fatalities on the ground as well. And so, looking here at the ADS-B exchange data, you can see here as they take off from runway 24, they begin to climb out and are picking up speed, making it to over 200 knots and made it to about 1,600 feet. And I do believe that the ATC directions were that they were supposed to turn to the right on a heading of 290 by this point, but for one reason or another, that never occurred. Now, I think the Philly area here is about 110 or 120 feet above the ground or so, so they basically made it to about 1,500 feet above the ground, and then obviously something goes tragically wrong, around right here, and the aircraft enters this insane steep dive where they're descending at something like 10 or 11,000 feet per minute. Then the aircraft impacts the ground at this massively high rate of speed and erupts into a huge fireball, which left this insane crater that you see here in the sidewalk just off of a very busy street outside of a shopping mall. Now, the jet was obviously just fueled up for this long trip, and it sprayed this atomized jet fuel all over the area, causing all of these other vehicles, including some homes and buildings, for them to burn. In addition to the jet fuel being sprayed all over the place, there was actually quite a lot of, debris and projectiles, especially from medical equipment, that was launched in all directions into buildings, with something even going through the windows of this diner that was right across the street and actually hitting this poor dude in the head. And you can see his hat actually fly off right here. I mean, it's terrible. And when it comes to the weather, I'm not really sure if weather was a factor here. It certainly could have. But there was supposed to be light rain and mist in the area with overcast clouds at about 400 feet, I think was the actual ceiling. And, I'm sure that there was fog setting in as the temperature and dew point were both at 9 degrees Celsius or about 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, it's certainly possible, though, that as soon as this Learjet got to about 12 or 1,300 feet, that they flew right into a heavy cloud, which certainly could have distracted the pilot and maybe led to a level of disorientation. But it's pretty much impossible to know that at this point in the game. But for a Learjet 55 taking off with an instrument flight plan, this normally really should not be much of an issue for this aircraft or this crew, assuming that, all of their equipment was functioning the way it should and the pilots were experienced and comfortable flying on instruments, which, there's really nothing right now to indicate that they wouldn't be. Now, being that this was in the middle of a major suburb in Northeast Philadelphia, this accident was caught on many security and dash cams and doorbell cameras. And you can see that the crash was just absolutely horrific, and it was loud. And I can only imagine that all of these people who saw this must have felt like the world was ending and that they thought they saw a bomb or a missile or something like that. It was just a very dramatic aircraft crash. Now, this aircraft is a Medevac aircraft who is run by a company called Jet Rescue. Now, who are they? Well, I've followed them for a couple years, and they are an extremely professional and very well-known air ambulance service with base operations in Mexico, as they have two of their big locations are actually in Mexico City as well as Guadalajara, but they do also have a U.S.-based location down in Miami, Florida. Now, Jet Rescue, who may go by MedJets, and in this case, I think their call sign was MedJets 56, or sometimes people were calling them Medevac 56, is a super diverse program with ground and air critical care operations. Locally in Mexico, they are doing some serious critical care medicine and transports. They're, doing emergency calls like 911 stuff, but they're doing high-risk OB, ECMO calls, neonatal transfers, et cetera, with their local helicopters and their ground fleet. And their local helicopters actually include a BO-105, which I think that's super cool. I love that aircraft, which has this very interesting livery, though, that looks just like CareFlight's livery out of Texas. And I think that they also utilize a Bell 206 locally as well. I'm not 100% sure if that's in their fleet, but I've seen that shared over the years. But their fixed wing program is made up of a very diverse fleet with Learjet 35s, which is very common, and Learjet 55s. And that probably makes up the bulk of their fixed wing flights. But they also have this super cool Falcon 50, which is a 3-engine jet that has a longer range. You can get hot meals on this aircraft, which is pretty good. And they have like a bathroom, which typically the 55 and the 35, at least in Medevac configurations, they don't have lavatories, so you basically got to hold it. But they use this a lot to fly across the ocean and go to Europe and parts of Africa. And I believe that they also have a Learjet 60 now, which is kind of an updated version of the 55. It's a little longer, it's a little more powerful, it has some better avionics, which is super cool. But in this case, they were flying under tail number X-Ray Alpha, Uniform Charlie India, which was one of their Learjet 55s. Now, the Lear 55 is a super common fixed-wing aircraft for extended range medevac flights all over the United States, but also all over the entire world, and is typically used to fly critical care patients and maybe their families where they need to be. For instance, real common occurrence would be like you live in Atlanta and you travel to Lake Tahoe to go skiing and you bust your ass and you break your pelvis, or during the trip you have a bad heart attack or you have a stroke or something like that, and you get your emergency care there in the Lake Tahoe area, but now you need your extended care to be continued back home in Atlanta. Well, this type of medical flight would be for you, as these aircraft would have all of the necessary medical equipment to manage your care, but they can fly you that very long distance needed and do so comfortably, as the Learjet 55 can, fly like 550 miles an hour and pretty high, up at like 50 or 51,000 feet. And depending on the configuration, you could also be able to fly with a family member or two. And in this case, that is exactly what was happening. Now, just one of the differences here is because this is a Mexican-based flight crew, we don't normally fly in the United States on fixed wings with physicians and paramedics. It's more common to have either 2 nurses or a nurse and a paramedic. But I think that's probably why there was a physician on board, is because this is a Mexican-based crew. Now, jet rescue has actually had at least one fatal accident in the past, which didn't occur that long ago. It was about a year and a half ago, just south of Mexico City in the Mexican state of Morelos, where one of their earlier model Learjet 35s actually overshot the runway and crashed into a hillside, killing all 5 crew members on board. Anyway, on the Philly crash here, there was a young girl on this aircraft who apparently had been in Philadelphia at Shriners Children's Hospital, one of the best children's facilities in the entire world, for some life-saving medical care, and needed transport back to Tijuana, Mexico. Now, I believe that there was actually a charitable organization that was funding this life-saving mission, and the treatment was complete, and the girl was with her family, and they were ready to go home, and that's why jet rescue was there. Now, I'm not 100% sure why they had to go to Springfield, Branson, Missouri, but it could probably be because they needed to refuel or maybe to get some medical equipment. Not really sure, but it looks like the final destination in Tijuana is about 2,400 miles away from Philadelphia by air, and the Lear 55 has a documented range of about 2,700 miles, but that could be reduced based on their equipment and the winds and how many people were on board and stuff like that. And like I said, this was a full flight where every seat was taken, so they very well may have been stopping in Missouri for fuel. And you can see here that this plane was just in Haiti a couple days ago. And then they flew to Miami, where they seemed to kind of hang out for a while until the aircraft flew to Philadelphia to pick up this young girl and her family, where it looks like they were on the ground in Philadelphia for about 3 or 4 hours, packaging up the patient, being transported back and forth to the airport, all that. Took about 3 to 4 hours. And then they took off last night at about 6 p.m., and then they crashed just 30 to 60 seconds after takeoff. In terms of the cause, it's just flat out too early to categorically tell anything that happened other than the plane obviously seemed completely out of control, and you could at least hear that the engine sounded like they were under power during the crash. Now, I can say that it is pretty difficult for a jet like this to be purposely orientated towards the ground like this from an altitude of just 1,500 feet. And so what I mean by that is, even if the pilot wanted to from 1,500 feet, I don't know if it would really be possible to push the stick forward enough to get the plane pointed directly at the ground like this from just 1,500 feet. But it certainly could end up pointing at the ground like this if the plane actually went into a full stall where the wings somehow exceeded the critical angle of attack, which then leads to losing all lift over the plane. And then the plane just nosedives out of the sky. So could this plane have flown into some unexpected clouds or fog, which may have startled and disorientated the pilot to the point where he pulled up too much and caused a stall? Yeah, that could have happened. Or the plane could have been overloaded, which messed with the center of gravity where too much weight was near the aft of the aircraft. And then when you add that to the possibility of the pilot pulling up too much, it certainly could contribute to stalling the aircraft, where it would then pitch the nose down and fall straight into the ground like you see in the video. Now, if something like that had happened at 30,000 feet, then the pilot would at least have a chance and have time to recover, but not at 1,500 feet. Once that aircraft was pointed down like that, there's really nothing that could have been done. Either way, it's too early to know for sure here, and this will certainly be a difficult investigation probably for the NTSB due to how much damage there was. And I just absolutely feel for the family and friends of the pilots, the girl and her family, and also the physician and the paramedic that were on board. I did just see that the Mexican president confirmed that all 6 of these folks were Mexican citizens, and I just feel for them, But on a high note, it sounds like all of the fire and EMS folks on the ground did an absolutely amazing job. This must have been such an unbelievably chaotic scene to show up to, with so many moving parts and all sorts of different safety concerns and dangers everywhere to address simultaneously, from cars and buildings burning all over the place from jet fuel to people being hit with projectiles to managing the overall structural stability of some of the buildings that were damaged. It's just absolute chaos. And it seems like all of the fire and EMS folks on the ground just did a stellar job. I don't think that I'm unique in this situation in that, from a flight paramedic standpoint, sometimes it's hard for my brain to process tragedies like this. You just got to think the flight crew, whether it's a physician or a flight nurse or a flight paramedic, where you just did all of this work to get to the patient, to learn their history, to formulate some type of treatment plan, and package this patient up and deal with her family, secure all of your equipment. And it's real common for flight paramedics and nurses and probably physicians too, that every time you get on a flight like this to, text or call your family and say, hey, we're getting on the plane, we're about to take off, love you to death. And notifying you're notifying your family and friends, where you're headed and where you're going to be. And the pilots, they're just trying to fly as safe as they can and get this girl to where she needs to be. And the med crew is just trying to manage the patient care to the best of their abilities and making this young girl and her family feel comfortable, and how the patient herself and her mother were probably so relieved to finally be going home after this expensive and life-saving and probably extremely stressful medical care that they received at Shriners. And then it's all over in an instant. It's a terrible tragedy, but nonetheless, keep your loved ones close. Enjoy every second that you have on this planet. And, once we figure out what happened here, let's all continue to strive to learn from these accidents as we move forward in our careers and our lives.